overall, I said a lot about the Four Swords in the last video, and I'm gonna say it again. I generally don't like to disattach the three games. And you know, when you see the intro of the Four Swords Adventures, it's really obvious that it's followed up. It was the predecessor, or Four Swords and Minish take place immediately before the Four Swords Adventures. So it's really strange that they suddenly cut it off like that. Put the Four Swords Adventures at the end, and puts the Minish Cap and the Four Swords here. And at the same time, like I said, these three games, the Four Swords series, they're not. They're really different from any other game in the series because they don't feature the Triforce, and they generally don't feature canon until the end. There's no talk about the Master Sword. It's instead replaced by the Four Sword. So it's just really hard for me to place it like this. I can't. It's a long stretch. Nintendo, I don't know if they explained it in the book itself, but translations don't show anything so far. But one thing that makes sense, generally they try to make it sense in the Minish and the Four Swords Adventures, is the intros and the endings. The important timeline spanning events. Nintendo focused on these, and you know, made the Triforce and the Master Sword sort of insignificant in the placement of these games, which kind of disappoints me. But I'm going to justify what they did here. Basically, the reason they placed the Minish Cap there is what I mentioned, is the intro of the Minish Cap. That's one thing, that a very important event, is that it shows that the Minish are, they sent a sword from the sky, and a golden light from the sky. So that's where basically Skyward Sword takes place, Skyloft and whatnot. But at the same time, it is contradictive, because from people who played Skyward Sword and finished it, no spoilers for me, please. I'm toward the end. The game does show or does set up Ocarina of Time. It's basically, set up what happens in Ocarina of Time and how come this happens. So it's pretty strange that they just placed the Minish Cap in the middle all of a sudden. But at the same time, it does another thing in the Minish Cap that's helpful in this placement after Skyward Sword is the Minish itself. The Minish, this race, like I said in the previous video, they do actually they provide a backstory to the whole Legend of Zelda series, and the reason why these rupees and the items are hidden in grass and hidden in homes like that. So they're the ones who put these items there. So that's one pro to this placement of the Minish Cap after Cyrus. It's an origin story. It does seem like it's an origin story. A con in the Minish Caps, see, put a plus, pro, a con here in the Minish Caps. Another con is the Light Force. They basically throw all potential in expanding on the Light Force or the Life Force. What it is, what's the reason of it? Is it the Triforce? Is it not? But it just featured in one game, and then after that, if we're talking about this main timeline here, Ocarina doesn't talk about the Life Force. Neither Majora nor Twilight. Four Swords Adventures does give hints, but it doesn't throw it in per se. So the Light Force is not featured here at all. So what is it? What is it? We don't know. But Nintendo sort of made it insignificant now, compared to what I was gonna, explain, or how was I gonna put the Four Swords in the timeline and make the Light Force significant enough. I'm gonna talk about that more later, but right now it's just basically insignificant. So if we go for the Four Swords Adventures here, right after Twilight Princess, I think it's in a different era. It should be in a different era. But it is, again, another strange thing is in this gap here, this, decades or eras of gaps here. Minish, Four Swords, and Four Swords Adventures feature the Four Sword instead of the Master Sword. So how come it appears here in this, and then disappears throughout all these games, or this era of games, and then it suddenly appears right back here? So yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. The same thing. So yeah, another con is the Four Sword. It just doesn't make any sense. So you'll see this as a common element. Another thing that doesn't make any sense is No, it does. Sorry about that. So yeah, the Force Sword, like it's like the Light Force, it's just sort of made insignificant with displacement. One pro to Force Sword's adventures is, and the important event is Ganon's revival, or reincarnation, as they like to call it. So that's one pro to the Force Swords Adventures. It does follow up. Twilight Princess, it shows Ganon dying and whatnot. So in Force Swords Adventures story is Ganon was actually using Vati for his revival or his reincarnation. It's not the same Ganon from Twilight Princess and Majora and Ocarina, Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time, the same one that has been sealed throughout the ages. It's a different Ganon. So yeah, that's it basically with what Nintendo did. They did also put in a lot of effort in explaining certain events that weren't talked about in the games much. One thing that was a constant point of debate in Ocarina of Time is when Link is sent back to the child timeline, what happens to the Triforce? So this is going to be really interesting backstory for Twilight Princess. A lot of people have been talking. So Link was sent back to Ocarina of Time to his child timeline. So it makes sense to say that the Triforce is actually unified or has never been touched in the Sacred Realm. But Nintendo explains it otherwise. They actually say that when Link is sent back to Ocarina of Time, the child timeline, he does have the Triforce of Courage. So this makes a very interesting point of debate and one significant scene in Twilight Princess is the Ganon execution scene. So this scene is it does take place in the era of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. During that era, what happens is that Nintendo explains it more is when Link is sent back and he meets Zelda, he tells her that Ganon's dangerous and stuff like that. So they make a preemptive strike and actually catch Ganon or stop him from invading Hyrule and whatnot. So this causes that scene, the execution scene, in which the sages execute him, but he doesn't die because he suddenly gets the infamous divine prank. The Triforce of Power suddenly appears in his hand. So now we know what starts this divine prank is Link's adventure in the adult timeline in Ocarina of Time. He comes back and the Triforce is split. And Ganon obviously, maybe he is perhaps unaware of the split of the Triforce, which is why he gets that thing, the Triforce of Power, all of a sudden. So that's a very interesting point of debate. So the Triforce is actually unified here, and they do say where exactly Link is sent back in time. He's sent back before he meets Zelda, as Zelda watches over Ganondorf through the window. So yeah, that's really interesting stuff all around. And basically, I guess that's it with Nintendo's justification of the timeline. Again, like I said, the positives is what they did with the classic games and oracles. They give it more significance. The negatives is basically what they did with the Four Swords series. They basically, screwed it up for all of us. It's just really hard to disattach for the Minish Cap and Four Swords from Four Swords Adventures. So I'd like to see them in one progressive timeline. So finally, I am running a bit late here, so 29 minutes, wow. So I'm going to try to attempt in explaining what I was about to do with the Four Swords series. Please watch my previous video so you could try to attach or understand what's going on here. So what I was going to do with it, I was talking about when the video cut off last.